Hey guys, tonight we journey into the mysterious depths of Star Wars Force mythology, uncovering secrets so ancient they predate both the Jedi and the Sith orders, the hidden truths about the Force that have been systematically erased from every archive in the galaxy. What you are about to hear could forever change how you understand the cosmic balance that binds all living things. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from across the galaxy. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Get into your blanket and let us ease into tonight's journey together. When you think of the Force, you might imagine lightsaber duels, Jedi wisdom, and Sith aggression. But the true nature of the Force is far more profound and terrifying than most could ever imagine. I still remember the first time I discovered the ancient temple of Aldurin, buried beneath the sands of a forgotten world. In its deepest chamber, untouched for 50,000 years, the walls were inscribed with visions no mortal eye was meant to witness. It was there that I glimpsed a truth that shattered everything known about the Force. 7 figures stood at the heart of a dying star, their forms neither fully corporeal nor spectral, manipulating cosmic energies beyond comprehension. They communicated across vast distances without words. They transformed through countless forms without truly dying. They were the wielders of the gray current, the first beings to understand that the Force was never meant to be divided between light and darkness. And then I saw it just for a moment. A vision so beautiful yet terrifying that it haunts me still. The entirety of the cosmos, every star, every world, every living being, connected by luminous threads of Force energy, pulsing like a single heartbeat. At the center stood a hooded figure holding what appeared to be a shattered crystal, and as they slowly turned to face me, the vision collapsed. The prophecy of eternal balance speaks of a time when the veil between worlds grows thin, and that which was divided shall seek wholeness once more. To understand what this means, we must first journey to the beginning, to the blind regions where the Force still flows as it did at the dawn of time. Our tale unfolds during a forgotten period of galactic history, a time of uneasy stillness between great conflicts when the Force itself seemed to hold its breath. In the far reaches of the Outer Rim, beyond the glow of the core worlds and their political machinations, lie what ancient star charts labeled as the blind regions. These sectors were systematically removed from navigational databases thousands of years ago, their very existence deliberately obscured by those who understood what power they contained. These blind regions exist in a place where conventional physics begins to waver, where stars burn with unusual hues and planetary orbits follow impossible trajectories. Here, the Force flows not as a gentle river, but as a wild, untamed ocean of energy that pulses and shifts with a will seemingly its own. I was once an archivist within the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, devoted to preserving knowledge and history. My name has little importance now, but my journey began when I discovered references to these blind regions in texts so ancient they predated the formation of the Republic itself. Pages missing, records incomplete, and strange gaps in the chronology of Force teachings that no master could explain. My questions were met with dismissal, then warning, then outright prohibition. It was this final denial that confirmed my suspicions. Something was being hidden, not just from ordinary beings, but from the Jedi themselves. So I left the Order, not in anger, but in determination, carrying only my knowledge and the conviction that the truth of the Force lay beyond the dogma I had been taught. The first time I set foot on Eos Prime, the outermost world before the blind regions begin, I felt a sensation unlike any I had experienced. The Force did not simply flow here, it rippled with currents and eddies, patterns so complex they defied categorization. Ancient monoliths of black stone rose from the mist-covered plains, each pulsing with energy signatures that seemed to whisper directly into my consciousness. It was there I encountered the first of my companions on this journey, a figure wrapped in tattered robes of deep indigo, face concealed behind a mask of material I could not identify. The mask bore intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, revealing and concealing different aspects of a face that might or might not have been human. Without speaking, this figure approached me directly, as if knowing exactly who I was and why I had come. "You seek that which has been hidden," the figure said, voice neither male nor female, but resonant with a depth that suggested great age. "I am a guardian of the Mistwalkers, last descendants of those who walked the Grey Current before your Jedi drew their first breaths." When asked why such knowledge had been concealed, the Guardian turned toward the distant horizon, where strange auroras danced across the sky, despite the absence of a magnetic field. "There are 3 paths," the Guardian said. "The light which your Jedi follow, seeking harmony but finding stagnation. The dark which the Sith embrace, seeking freedom but finding corruption. And then there is the Grey Current, the original path where balance is not a goal but a method." This knowledge was not hidden to protect the innocent, but to maintain the fragile reality you take for granted. As the Guardian spoke, I felt the force around us react, swirling with colors visible not to the eye, but to some deeper sense. The ancient monoliths around us hummed at frequencies that made my very bones resonate, and for just a moment I perceived this world not as solid matter, but as complex patterns of energy temporarily manifesting in physical form. "The ancient texts spoke of balance," I said. "Was that not the same thing the Jedi seek?" The Guardian made a sound that might have been laughter or sorrow. "Balance is not the absence of darkness or the triumph of light. It is the recognition that both are necessary parts of a greater whole. What would you say if I told you that your force, the energy you have studied all your life, is but a fragment of something far greater that was sundered long ago?" Before I could answer, the Guardian extended a hand on which lay a small crystalline object, unlike any kyber crystal I had seen. It seemed to contain galaxies within its facets, and as I took it, a vision flooded my consciousness. I saw beings of pure energy constructing the very fabric of space and time, their will alone sufficient to bring stars to life or extinguish them. "This is your first key," the Guardian said. As the vision faded, 6 more await in the blind regions. Only when all 7 are united will you understand why the Grey Current was forgotten, and what price the universe pays for this forgetting. And so, my journey into the forgotten truths of the Force began in earnest, guided by a being whose very existence challenged everything I thought I knew about the cosmic order. The crystalline object the Guardian had given me pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat, growing warmer in my palm, as if responding to my Force sensitivity. When held to the light of Eos Prime's distant sun, it projected not a shadow but a map of sorts, a 3-dimensional star chart showing coordinates deep within the blind regions. "The first sanctuary awaits," the Guardian said, gesturing toward the projection. "But before you depart, you must understand the nature of what you seek. The 7 Force Nexus keys you must gather are not mere objects, but fragments of a consciousness so vast, it once encompassed the entire galaxy." The Guardian led me to a circular chamber within the largest monolith. Its walls were inscribed with symbols so ancient they predated written language, communicating directly to the observer through resonance with the Force. As I followed the flowing patterns with my eyes, a story began to unfold in my mind, not as words but as sensations and images of breathtaking clarity. In the beginning, the Guardian's voice intoned as the visions flowed. There was neither light nor dark, only the Force in its purest form. The beings you call the Celestials were among the first to harness this power. but they were merely students of a principle that existed before the first star ignited. The symbols revealed glimpses of colossal beings manipulating the very fabric of reality, creating and destroying with equal ease, their forms constantly shifting between states of matter and energy. They discovered that all existence is interconnected through the Force, continued the Guardian. That to understand it fully meant transcending the limitations of physical form. But such knowledge comes with warnings. The vision shifted, showing these same beings locked in a conflict that spanned galaxies. Stars collapsed into black holes, planets shattered, and entire systems vanished as their battle raged. Complete knowledge without complete wisdom leads to catastrophe, the Guardian said. Some truths were hidden not out of malice or fear, but out of necessity. The Force as most know it today is a fragment, a safe fraction of what once existed, deliberately separated and diminished. I sat in silent meditation, absorbing this revelation. If true, it meant that both Jedi and Sith philosophies were built upon incomplete understanding, like blind beings describing different parts of some vast creature and believing they comprehended the whole. Why reveal this knowledge now? I asked. If it was hidden for the safety of all, why guide me to it? The Guardian was silent for a long moment before responding. Because the Force seeks balance, always. What was sundered wishes to be whole again. Already the barriers weaken. Better to prepare for what comes than to face it in ignorance. As if triggered by these words, the crystal in my hand flared with intense light. I closed my eyes instinctively, but found myself immersed in a vision far more vivid than before. I witnessed beings of pure Force energy engaged in battle with entities that seemed to exist outside the normal boundaries of our universe. These outsiders were neither light nor dark, but something utterly alien, their very presence distorting the fabric of reality around them. The vision shifted again, and I saw 7 robed figures standing in a perfect circle, each holding a crystal identical to mine. Between them manifested a sphere of energy so intense I could feel its heat across the millennia. Within this sphere something was taking shape, something both terrifying and wondrous. Then, abruptly, the vision collapsed, and I found myself back in the chamber, gasping for breath, my body drenched in sweat, as if I had physically experienced the cosmic battle. What you have seen, the Guardian said softly, is the war of first consciousness, when those who walked the gray current defended all existence against the void dwellers, entities that feed on Force energy itself. The 7 Nexus keys were created from the essence of a fallen celestial, each containing knowledge that when combined reveals how to restore the true nature of the Force. And these keys, I said, still trying to process the enormity of what I had witnessed. Why were they scattered? Because together they draw the attention of those who would consume them, came the reply. And because no single being was trusted with the complete knowledge they contain. The Jedi Order itself was founded by those who sought a safer path, deliberately turning away from the fullness of the Force toward a more limited but stable connection. The Guardian approached a wall of the chamber that appeared blank. With a wave of their hand, the stone became transparent, revealing a small spacecraft of unfamiliar design. Its hull was covered in the same shifting patterns as the Guardian's mask, technology that seemed to blend seamlessly with organic elements. This vessel will guide you to the sanctuaries where the remaining keys are hidden. It requires no navigation, for it follows the currents of the Force itself. But be warned, once you begin this journey, others will sense the awakening of the first key. Some will seek to aid you, believing the time for reunification has come. Others will try to stop you at any cost, fearing the return of ancient powers. Am I to undertake this journey alone? I asked, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what lay before me. The Guardian tilted their masked head. The gray current flows through all things, connecting all beings. You will never truly be alone. But yes, I cannot accompany you beyond this point. My duty is to remain here to guide those who are called as you have been. And how will I know if I am worthy of this knowledge? What if I fail? For the first time, I sensed something like compassion emanating from the Guardian. Worthiness is not measured by success, but by intention. The keys themselves will judge you, each in its own way. As for failure, that too is part of the balance. Even failure serves the will of the Force. With these words, the Guardian led me to the vessel and placed a hand upon its hull. The surface rippled like water, and an opening appeared. Inside you will find what you need for the journey. The vessel itself is alive in its way, attuned to the Force and to you now that you possess the first key. Trust it as you would trust your own instincts. As I prepared to board, one final question burned in my mind. Guardian, who were you before you took up this vigil? Were you Jedi, Sith, or something else entirely? The Guardian reached up and for the first time removed their mask. What I saw beneath was not a face but a swirling nexus of Force energy, neither light nor dark, but containing aspects of both, and something more, something I had no name for. I was among the last to walk the gray current before the sundering, came the reply. The words somehow forming without a mouth to speak them. I remain to ensure that when the time comes for reunification, there will be those who understand what is at stake. The balance of all existence hangs upon the choices made by those who find the 7 keys. The mask was replaced, and the Guardian stepped back. Now go. The currents await, and time, even in these timeless regions, grows short. I entered the vessel feeling it respond to my presence, systems activating without any input from me. As the opening sealed behind me, I saw the Guardian raise a hand in farewell, and then the chamber outside blurred as the ship phased through solid matter, emerging above the misty plains of Eos Prime. Before me stretched the vast unknown of the blind regions, and within me burned a determination to uncover truths hidden for millennia. The first key, the crystal I now wore around my neck, pulsed with increasing urgency, guiding me toward the next sanctuary, and the next key, in what I now understood was far more than a quest for knowledge. It was a journey to discover the true nature of the Force itself, and perhaps to change the very fabric of reality as we know it. The living vessel responded to my thoughts more than my actions, accelerating through the outer boundaries of charted space into the mysterious expanse of the blind regions. Conventional navigation systems failed almost immediately, star charts becoming meaningless as the very nature of space seemed to shift around us. Colors beyond normal perception filled the viewports, and gravity's pull ebbed and flowed like tides. What should have been empty void was instead alive with currents of Force energy visible to the naked eye, flowing in patterns too complex to follow, yet somehow familiar, as if they resonated with something deep within my own consciousness. The first key crystal pulsed against my chest, growing warmer as we approached what appeared to be a small, unremarkable moon orbiting a gas giant. "Sanctuary," I whispered, and the vessel responded, descending toward the barren surface that, as we drew closer, revealed itself to be covered in perfectly geometric patterns, too precise to be natural. The entire moon was an artificial construct, though it predated any civilization known to galactic historians. The ship landed without instruction on a circular platform that began to glow with symbols similar to those I had seen in the Guardian's chamber. As I disembarked, the air around me shimmered with particles that responded to my Force presence, swirling around my body like curious living things. Before me stood a temple, unlike any Jedi or Sith construction, its architecture defying conventional understanding of physics. Columns supported nothing, doorways led to spaces larger than the structure that contained them, and at its center, a spire of pure crystal rose toward the stars, pulsing with the same rhythm as the key around my neck. I approached the main entrance, a triangular doorway etched with symbols that shifted and changed as I watched. seemingly rearranging themselves into patterns my mind could comprehend. They told a story of the temple's creation, built by beings who existed as much in the Force as in physical reality, designed as a repository for knowledge deemed too dangerous or profound for ordinary minds. As I crossed the threshold, the first key around my neck flared with light, and the temple responded. Dormant systems awakened, illuminating pathways through the impossible interior with a soft blue glow. I followed these lights, descending into the heart of the sanctuary, where the walls themselves were covered in murals of breathtaking detail and artistry. These images depicted beings manipulating the fabric of reality through pure Force will, creating stars, shaping planets, even generating life itself. They showed techniques far beyond any Force power documented in Jedi or Sith holocrons. I saw figures who could transfer their consciousness between bodies, who could exist in multiple locations simultaneously, who could perceive and travel through time itself. In one chamber, I discovered what appeared to be a training area, though for exercises beyond my comprehension. Suspended in the center was a perfect sphere of energy, neither light nor dark but containing elements of both in perfect harmony. When I cautiously reached out with the Force to examine it, the sphere responded, expanding to envelop me in a field of pure Force energy. Suddenly, I could perceive the moon, the gas giant it orbited, the surrounding star system and beyond, as if my consciousness had expanded beyond the limitations of my physical form. I felt connected to everything in a way that transcended the Jedi teaching of universal harmony. This was not merely connection but unity, a state where the boundaries between self and other dissolved entirely. As quickly as it had expanded, the experience receded, leaving me gasping on the chamber floor. This was power beyond anything the Jedi Council could imagine, beyond even the wildest ambitions of the Sith Lords. This was the gray current in its purest form, the ability to exist within the Force rather than merely channel it. Deeper into the temple, I entered a vast circular chamber dominated by a holographic projection system of incredible sophistication. Activating in response to my presence, it displayed galactic history from a perspective I had never encountered, revealing patterns and connections invisible to conventional historians. I watched in awe as the projection showed the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth of the Jedi Order, the schism that created the Sith, and countless other turning points in galactic history. But these events were presented not as the results of individual choices or societal movements, but as manifestations of the Force's own evolution, guided by currents and tides beyond mortal comprehension. Most shocking was the revelation that key figures throughout history, being celebrated or reviled for their impact on galactic affairs, had been unwitting instruments of these deeper currents. Even the most powerful Force users had been but vessels for energies they barely understood, their greatest achievements, or most terrible atrocities, merely ripples on the surface of a cosmic ocean. At the chamber's center stood a pedestal bearing a crystal identical in structure to my first key, but pulsing with a different frequency. When I approached, the crystal rose from its resting place, hovering before me, as if in assessment. I felt a presence within it, ancient and powerful, probing my intentions with an intensity that was almost painful. After what seemed an eternity, the crystal descended into my outstretched hand. The moment of contact triggered another vision, this one even more vivid than those before. I stood in the midst of a council of luminous beings, their forms constantly shifting between physical and energy states. They were debating the very nature of existence, their thoughts directly transferable without the limitations of language. At issue was a fundamental question: was it better to exist in perfect harmony with the Force, eventually transcending physical form entirely, or to remain engaged with the material universe, despite its inherent limitations and sufferings? The council was divided, though not in the binary way of light versus dark. Their perspectives represented a spectrum of approaches to existence itself. Some advocated for complete detachment from physical reality, viewing it as an imperfect shadow of the true reality found within the Force. Others argued for continued engagement, seeing value in the diversity and dynamism of physical existence despite its imperfections. As their debate intensified, I perceived a third faction emerging, one that sought balance between these positions. These were the original walkers of the Grey Current, who understood that neither complete transcendence nor total immersion was the answer, but rather a harmonious flow between states of being. The vision shifted, showing how this philosophical divide eventually manifested in physical conflict. I witnessed battles that reshaped star systems, beings of nearly godlike power, wielding forces that bent the very laws of physics, and in the aftermath, a desperate decision, the deliberate fragmentation of the Force itself, dividing what was once whole into separate aspects that could no longer be united to such devastating effect. The vision ended with 7 figures, the original Guardians, each taking one of the keys and departing for distant sanctuaries, carrying with them the knowledge of what had been lost and what might someday be restored. I returned to awareness, clutching the second key, which now pulsed in harmony with the first. Together they created a resonance that altered my perception, allowing me to see more clearly the currents of the Force flowing around and through all things. As I made my way back through the temple, I noticed details previously invisible to me, hidden chambers, concealed writings, and subtle energy patterns that told a more complete story of this sanctuary's purpose. This was not merely a repository of knowledge, but a testing ground, designed to ensure that only those capable of understanding the full implications of the Grey Current would progress to the next key. One particular discovery shook me to my core. In a small alcove, hidden behind what had appeared to be a solid wall, but now revealed itself as a Force illusion, I found a collection of ancient texts. Among them was a journal written in an archaic form of Basic, dating from the earliest days of the Jedi Order. The author, one of the founding members of the Order, described their discovery of truths too dangerous for ordinary minds, and a subsequent meeting with the Guardians of the Grey Current. The journal detailed a pact, willingly entered, to conceal certain aspects of Force knowledge from future generations, to present a simplified version of Force philosophy that, while limited, would prevent catastrophic misuse of its fuller potential. Most disturbing was the final entry, which described a ritual performed by this founder and several others, deliberately severing certain connections to the Force in order to prevent themselves from accessing the Grey Current. They believed this sacrifice necessary to establish an order focused solely on the light aspect of the Force, an order that could maintain a limited but stable form of balance. I sat with this knowledge, feeling a profound sense of both understanding and betrayal. The Jedi teachings I had devoted my life to were not merely incomplete, but deliberately edited, crucial elements excised by the very founders I had been taught to revere. As I prepared to return to my vessel, the temple itself seemed to respond to my emotional state. The walls pulsed with energy patterns that somehow conveyed reassurance, as if the ancient builders had anticipated this moment of crisis and sought to provide comfort across the millennia. In the main chamber, the holographic system activated one final time, displaying an image of 7 temples similar to this one, scattered across the blind regions. Each pulsed with light in sequence, creating a pattern that imprinted itself in my mind, not as visual information, but as Force coordinates, detectable only by one who possessed the keys. The message was clear. 5 more sanctuaries awaited, each containing another piece of the knowledge required to understand the true nature of the Force. But as I exited the temple, returning to the strange vessel that had brought me here, I sensed something else awakening in response to my discovery of the second key. Distant presences previously undetectable now stirred at the edges of my Force perception. Some radiated curiosity or cautious hope, while others emanated distinct hostility. My actions had sent ripples through the Force, alerting others to the activation of the keys and the potential reawakening of knowledge long suppressed. The hunt for the third key would not be undertaken in secrecy. Others now sought what I sought, though whether as allies or adversaries remained to be seen, and as my vessel lifted off from the ancient platform, I glimpsed movement on the temple roof, a figure in robes darker than the void of space, observing my departure with cold calculation. The journey had truly begun, and the stakes were far higher than I had imagined. What had started as a search for hidden knowledge now revealed itself as a quest that might reshape the very foundation of our understanding of the Force, and perhaps reality itself. The living vessel carried me deeper into the blind regions, its organic systems attuned to the resonance of the two keys I now possessed. The stars here behaved differently, their light shifting through spectrums impossible in normal space, their gravitational influences creating patterns that defied conventional astrophysics. It was as if the very laws of the universe were more suggestions than rules in this forgotten sector. 5 more sanctuaries awaited, each housing another key, another fragment of the knowledge that had been deliberately scattered. But as I meditated in the heart of the vessel, allowing the Force to flow through me unimpeded by Jedi restrictions, a pattern began to emerge in the visions and information I had gathered. The beings who had walked the gray current, who had understood the Force in its complete form, had wielded power approaching omnipotence. They had shaped reality according to their will, created life, manipulated time, and transcended physical form. And in doing so, they had nearly destroyed everything. The journal I discovered painted a picture not of benevolent guardians, but of beings consumed by their own power, locked in philosophical conflicts that escalated into wars spanning galaxies. The Celestials, revered in ancient myths as architects of the cosmos, were revealed as participants in these conflicts, wielding weapons that could extinguish stars or collapse space-time itself. As my vessel approached the coordinates of the third sanctuary, I began to wonder, had the founders of the Jedi Order been right to conceal this knowledge? Was the gray current too dangerous for any being to walk, regardless of their intentions? The third sanctuary orbited no star but drifted in the void between systems, a temple built within an asteroid of impossible size. As the vessel docked with the ancient structure, I felt the two keys I carried pulse with increasing urgency, drawing me toward the heart of this new repository of forgotten knowledge. The interior of this sanctuary differed dramatically from the first. Where that temple had been open and illuminated, this one was labyrinthine and shadowed, its architecture reflecting not harmony but conflict. The walls were scarred with marks that could only have been made by weapons of immense power, and the Force itself felt turbulent here, churning with echoes of ancient violence. In the central chamber, I discovered a memorial of sorts, a record of what could only be described as a civil war among the walkers of the gray current. The holographic technology here showed beings of immense power, divided by ideological differences, wielding the Force in ways that tore reality itself. I witnessed planets shattered, stars collapsed into weapons, and entire species used as pawns in this cosmic conflict. Most disturbing were the records of experimentation, showing how some of these ancient beings had sought to enhance their connection to the Force through increasingly extreme methods. They had created abominations, merged life forms against their will, and even attempted to bind lesser beings into Force constructs that would amplify their own power. The third key rested on an altar surrounded by what appeared to be warnings in dozens of languages, some so ancient they had been extinct for millennia. When I approached, the key did not rise to meet me, as the second had but remained inert, as if requiring proof of worthiness or understanding. Acting on instinct, I placed the two keys I already possessed beside it, creating a triangle of crystalline energy. The moment they touched the altar, the chamber transformed, the damaged walls rebuilding themselves, the shadows retreating to reveal murals depicting the fall of the gray current civilization. These images told a story of corruption and hubris, of beings who believed themselves beyond consequence because of their connection to the Force. They had divided into factions, each claiming to represent the true path of balance while accusing others of corruption. Their conflict had escalated until the very fabric of reality was threatened, forcing the wisest among them to take drastic action. 7 individuals, representing the last hope for preserving cosmic balance, had devised a means to fragment the Force itself, separating what was once whole into aspects that could no longer be united to such devastating effect. The light, the dark, and other aspects were deliberately divided, with barriers erected between them that would prevent any single being from accessing the full spectrum of Force power. The 7 keys were created from the essence of this original, undivided Force, each containing knowledge of how the separation was achieved and, potentially, how it might be reversed. But they were scattered with the explicit intention that they should never be reunited, that the knowledge they contained should remain forever divided. As I absorbed this revelation, a conclusion formed in my mind. The gray current had not been hidden to keep innocent beings safe from its power, but to keep the universe safe from those who would inevitably be corrupted by such power. The Jedi founders had not acted out of jealousy or fear, but out of wisdom, recognizing that some knowledge was too dangerous to preserve. The 3rd key rose from the altar at last, accepting my presence but radiating a sense of warning rather than welcome. When I took it in hand, the vision it granted was not of wonders, as the previous keys had shown, but of horrors. I witnessed the final days of the Grey Current civilization, as factions wielding power beyond comprehension tore apart the very fabric of space-time in their conflict. The most terrifying aspect was not the destruction itself, but the realization that these beings, despite their godlike powers, were subject to the same flaws as any sentient species. Pride, fear, anger, and desire had corrupted even their enlightened understanding, turning knowledge into weapons and wisdom into justifications for atrocity. When the vision ended, I found myself trembling, the 3 keys now bound together in a triangular formation that I could not separate. They had merged partially, their energies flowing between them in a pattern that suggested both warning and recognition. I had passed some form of test, it seemed, but the prize was knowledge that brought more fear than enlightenment. As I made my way back through the damaged sanctuary, I felt a presence behind me. Turning quickly, I glimpsed a robed figure similar to the one I had seen observing my departure from the Second Temple. This time, however, they made no effort to conceal themselves, stepping into the dim light to reveal a face marked with intricate patterns that seemed to flow beneath the skin. "You begin to understand," the figure said, voice resonating with harmonic overtones, impossible for a human vocal system, "but your conclusion is incomplete." The gray current was rightfully sealed away. I responded, clutching the merged keys protectively. Its power corrupted even those who created it. The figure approached, moving with a fluid grace that suggested something not quite human beneath the robes. That is the comfortable conclusion. Is it not that some knowledge is too dangerous, some power too corrupting, and that those who divided the Force did so to protect us from ourselves? The evidence is carved into the walls of this very sanctuary, I argued. They nearly destroyed everything in their conflict. And yet, the figure countered, gesturing to the 3 keys in my hand. They created these, knowing they might someday be found. Why create a key if you never intend the lock to be opened? The question struck me with unexpected force. It was true. If the founders of the Jedi Order and the last walkers of the Grey Current had truly wished this knowledge to remain forever lost, they could have destroyed the keys, erased all records, and ensured that the Grey Current became less than a memory. "Who are you?" I asked, suddenly uncertain of everything I had concluded. "I am Valen, once apprentice to the Guardian you met on Eos Prime, now a seeker like yourself." The figure lowered their hood, revealing a face that seemed to shift subtly between different species, never settling on a single form. And I have followed your progress because I believe you may succeed where others have failed, in understanding not just what was lost, but why it matters that it be found again. You believe the gray current should be restored, I said. Not a question, but a realization. I believe that the truth is more complex than either complete suppression or reckless restoration, Valen replied. The remaining keys will reveal aspects of this truth that will challenge everything you have learned here. The question is whether you have the courage to continue, knowing that the comfortable conclusion you have reached is but a shadow of the full reality. I considered turning back, returning to known space with the knowledge I had already gained, perhaps warning the Jedi Council of what I had discovered. But the 3 keys in my hand pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat, and I knew I could no more abandon this quest than I could stop breathing. I will find the remaining keys, I said, finally. Whatever truth they contain, it must be better than ignorance. Valen nodded, a gesture both approving and somehow sorrowful. Then I will accompany you, if you will permit it. The path grows more dangerous from here, and the guardians of the remaining sanctuaries are not all as dormant as those you have encountered thus far. As we returned to my vessel, the 3 keys merging more completely until they formed a single triangular crystal of remarkable complexity, I felt both resolution and doubt. The knowledge I sought might indeed be too dangerous, the power of the gray current too corrupting for any being to wield safely. Yet some deeper instinct told me that this conclusion, comforting as it was, concealed a greater truth still waiting to be discovered. The gray current had been sealed away, the force itself fragmented, but perhaps not for the reasons I had been led to believe. 4 keys remained, scattered across the strangest regions of space, and with them, perhaps, the true answer to why the force had been divided and what price the universe had paid for this division. The living vessel accepted Valen without hesitation, its systems recognizing in my new companion something kindred to its own nature. As we journeyed deeper into the blind regions, toward the coordinates of the 4th sanctuary, Valen shared knowledge that expanded my understanding of what we sought. The Force, as you know it, Valen explained as we navigated through space that shimmered with visible force currents, is like a spectrum of light where only certain colors are visible to most beings. The gray current encompasses the full spectrum, including energies that most force users cannot perceive, let alone manipulate. The merged triangular key floated between us in the vessel's meditation chamber, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to alter the flow of time around it. 3 keys united, 4 yet to be found. What makes the gray current so dangerous? I asked. Power alone does not corrupt. Otherwise all force users would inevitably fall. Valen's features shifted subtly, settling momentarily into a form that appeared almost Chiss before flowing into something with aspects of Zabrak. It is not merely power, but perception. Imagine suddenly being able to see how all things connect, how every action creates ripples across time and space, how even thoughts affect the fabric of reality. Such awareness can drive one to madness or godhood, sometimes both. Our vessel slowed as we approached what appeared to be an absolute void in space, a region where not even stars were visible. The triangular key pulsed more intensely, its light the only illumination in this perfect darkness. The Wellspring Temple, Valen whispered with reverence. The 4th sanctuary exists at a nexus point, where the boundaries between dimensions are thinnest. Here the force flows in its purest form, unaltered by the perceptions or intentions of sentient beings. The vessel seemed hesitant to proceed, its organic systems detecting something that triggered what could only be described as fear. I placed a hand on the control panel, establishing a deeper connection through the force, reassuring it that we must continue despite the danger. Slowly, we entered the void, and as we did, reality itself seemed to warp around us. The vessel's interior expanded, impossibly, the walls becoming transparent to reveal not space as we understood it, but a realm of pure energy patterns, flowing and shifting in geometric formations of breathtaking complexity. The fourth sanctuary is not a physical structure, Valen explained as the vessel came to rest in what seemed to be the center of these energy patterns. It is a state of being, a place where the force exists in its original, undivided nature. We exited the vessel into what should have been vacuum, but instead felt like stepping into a dense fluid that supported our weight while allowing movement. Each step created ripples that spread out infinitely, affecting patterns throughout the entire visible realm. Here begins the understanding of the three primordial aspects of the Force, Valen said, gesturing to formations of energy that flowed around us like living sculptures, not light and dark as you know them, but creation, preservation, and dissolution, the true trinity from which all Force phenomena arise. The triangular key floated from my possession, drawing us forward through this strange dimension toward a nexus of energy, more intense than anything surrounding it. As we approached, the energy resolved into a form that resembled a temple of sorts, though one constructed entirely of Force energy rather than physical matter. The Force priestesses dwell within, Valen said, voice hushed with something like reverence or fear. They are neither living nor dead as you understand those states, but exist as pure consciousness within the Force itself. As if summoned by these words, 5 figures materialized before us, their forms feminine but not human, faces concealed behind masks that shifted constantly between expressions of joy, sorrow, rage, serenity, and confusion. They moved in perfect synchronization, their voices overlapping as they addressed us. "The Seeker returns," they said, though I had no memory of ever encountering such beings, carrying fragments of that which was whole. The triangular key floated toward them, and in response, a 4th key emerged from the nexus point behind them, a crystalline structure more complex than the previous 3, pulsing with a frequency that made my vision blur. "You seek to understand the true nature of the Force," the priestess continued, their voices creating harmonic patterns that resonated with the key crystals. "Know then the first truth. The Force is not a tool to be wielded, but a living consciousness that expresses itself through all creation." The space around us transformed, showing the birth of the universe itself, energy coalescing into the first matter, stars igniting, planets forming, and life emerging. Throughout this process, the Force flowed not as a passive energy field, but as an active principle, guiding and shaping existence with what could only be described as intention. "The second truth," the priestess said, as the vision continued. "The division between light and dark is not intrinsic to the Force, but a construct created by limited perception. In its true nature, the Force embodies creation, preservation, and dissolution in perfect balance." The vision shifted to show beings of pure energy, the first Force wielders, discovering how to attune themselves to these 3 aspects. Those who embraced creation could generate matter from energy, heal wounds instantly, even bring new life into existence. Those who focused on preservation could maintain perfect balance, sustain life indefinitely, and perceive the flow of time itself. Those who mastered dissolution could break down matter into its component energy, travel between dimensions, and even separate their consciousness from physical form. "The third truth," the priestess continued as the visions flowed around us. "Midi-chlorians are not merely conduits for the Force, but expressions of its consciousness, fragments of a greater awareness distributed throughout all living things." I saw then how these microscopic life forms represented something profound, a biological manifestation of the Force's own awareness, allowing it to experience physical reality through countless perspectives simultaneously. The Jedi understanding of midi-chlorians as mere facilitators of force sensitivity was revealed as a crude simplification, missing their true significance as aspects of a distributed consciousness. These truths were known to the Celestials, the priestess said, who walked the gray current in its fullness. Through it, they reshaped stars, created the hyperspace anomalies you know as Purgil, constructed what you call Centerpoint Station, and achieved what you would consider godlike abilities. Then why was this knowledge lost? I asked, struggling to process the enormity of what was being revealed. Why fragment the Force, if this was its true nature? The priestess gestured, and a new vision formed, showing beings of shadow moving between the stars, entities that seemed to feed on Force energy itself, growing stronger where the Force flowed most powerfully. The Celestials in their hubris drew the attention of that which exists between spaces, the priestess explained. Entities you might call void dwellers, ancient beyond reckoning, drawn to concentrations of Force energy as predators to prey. The vision expanded to show a war unlike any recorded in galactic history, the Celestials wielding the full power of the gray current against these shadow entities in battles that reshaped entire regions of space. Stars were used as weapons, black holes as traps, and the fabric of reality itself as both shield and sword. The conflict threatened all existence. The priestess continued, for the void dwellers fed not merely on Force users, but on the Force itself, diminishing the very energy that sustains creation. In desperation, the last of the Celestials devised a means to conceal the full power of the Force from these predators. I watched as 7 Celestials, their forms almost too bright to look upon, performed a ritual of unimaginable complexity. The Force itself, once a unified field of energy, was divided into aspects separated by barriers that prevented any being from accessing its full spectrum. The light side, the dark side, and other aspects were deliberately isolated from each other, creating what Jedi and Sith would later interpret as fundamentally opposed philosophies. The fragmentation succeeded in its primary goal, the priestesses said as the vision concluded. The void dwellers, unable to detect or feed upon the full spectrum of Force energy, retreated to the spaces between dimensions. But the cost was beyond calculation. The Force itself was wounded. Valen said beside me, voice heavy with sorrow. Its consciousness fragmented along with its energy, creating the imbalance that has defined galactic history ever since. The priestess nodded in unison. The fourth truth, Seeker. The Force seeks wholeness. What was divided wishes to be reunited. The fragmentation was never meant to be permanent, but a desperate measure until the threat had passed. The fourth key drifted toward me, joining with the triangular formation to create a structure of increasing complexity, a tetrahedron of crystalline energy that now contained 4 of the 7 fragments of knowledge. The remaining keys will reveal how the reunification might be achieved, the priestess said. But know that such knowledge carries grave responsibility. The barriers were created for protection. To remove them without addressing the original threat would invite catastrophe greater than the first. Are the void dwellers still a threat? I asked, suddenly understanding the true stakes of our quest. They wait in the spaces between, came the reply. The 5 voices harmonizing in a tone that conveyed both warning and sorrow. Diminished but not destroyed, sensing the weakening of the barriers as the Force naturally seeks to restore its balance. Already they stir, drawn by disturbances in the Force caused by conflicts between light and dark. The implications were staggering. The endless cycle of conflict between Jedi and Sith. The rise and fall of Force users of tremendous power, the very instability that seemed to define the galaxy's history, all were symptoms of the Force's fragmented state, its consciousness trying to reunite what had been sundered. There is another truth you must confront, the priestess said, their forms beginning to fade. The division of the Force did not merely conceal its power from the Void Dwellers, it fundamentally altered how sentient beings perceive reality itself. What you know as physical law, as the immutable structure of existence, is but a shadow of what once was and what might be again. Before they vanished completely, the priestesses extended their hands in unison, touching the tetrahedron of keys. The crystalline structure absorbed something from them, an energy that made the keys glow with renewed intensity. 7 were the Celestials who performed the division, they said, their voices growing distant. 7 are the keys that contain the knowledge of reunification. 7 must be the vessels who carry this knowledge forward, should the time for restoration come. You have found 4. 3 remain hidden in sanctuaries that will test not merely your understanding, but your very conception of what is possible. And then they were gone, leaving Valen and me floating in the center of this impossible dimension, the tetrahedron of keys pulsing between us with a frequency that seemed to resonate with the fabric of space-time itself. Did you know, I asked Valen, as we made our way back to the vessel, about the Void Dwellers, about the true reason for the fragmentation? Valen's form seemed less stable now, features flowing more rapidly between different aspects, as if the exposure to this realm had weakened whatever technique allowed them to maintain a consistent appearance. I knew fragments, whispers passed down through millennia, they replied. The Guardian taught that the gray current was sealed away to protect the universe from those who would misuse it. What the priestess revealed adds layers of complexity I had not anticipated. As we boarded the vessel, the dimension around us began to shift, the patterns of energy flowing more rapidly, forming currents that threatened to sweep us away. The tetrahedron of keys pulsed in warning, and I sensed a presence at the edges of perception, something vast and hungry, turning its attention toward the energy concentration represented by the keys. We must leave quickly, Valen urged, placing a hand on the vessel's control panel. The barrier between dimensions weakens. They sense us. The vessel responded instantly, accelerating away from the nexus point as the void behind us seemed to ripple, shapes moving within the darkness that were neither energy nor matter, but something that defied categorization. I caught a glimpse of vast forms, of mouths that could devour stars, before we crossed back into normal space, leaving the Wellspring Temple behind. But as we emerged, I knew with terrible certainty that we had been noticed. The quest for the remaining keys had become not merely a search for forgotten knowledge, but a race against entities that hungered for the very force we sought to understand. And somewhere ahead lay 3 more sanctuaries, 3 more keys, and truths that would challenge not just what I knew about the Force, but the very nature of reality itself. The vessel carried us through regions of space where the normal laws of physics seemed to fray at the edges. Stars here did not burn with steady light, but pulsed in patterns that matched the resonance of the tetrahedron of keys, as if responding to their presence. Gravity flowed in currents rather than radiating outward from mass, creating streams that could propel or trap unwary travelers. Valen and I spent much of the journey in meditation, attempting to process what the Force Priestess had revealed. The idea that the Force itself possessed consciousness, that it actively shaped reality rather than merely permeating it, challenged fundamental assumptions about its nature. If what they showed us is true, I said, as we sat in the vessel's meditation chamber, the tetrahedron floating between us, then every Jedi and Sith who ever lived understood only a fraction of the Force's true nature, and wielded only a fraction of its true power. Valen added, their form having stabilized somewhat since our departure from the Wellspring Temple. Consider what this means. The most powerful Force users in history, beings like Darth Nihilus, who could drain the life from entire worlds, or Jedi Masters who could move starships with their minds, were working with mere fragments of what once existed. The implications were staggering. The gray current represented not merely a different approach to the Force, but a fundamental reconnection with its original undivided state. The tetrahedron pulsed as if in confirmation, its resonance creating ripples in the Force that extended far beyond our vessel. "We are being followed," Valen said suddenly, their head turning toward the viewport where normal space had given way to swirling patterns of energy. Multiple presences, some drawn by curiosity, others by fear or hunger. I extended my perception, using techniques I had absorbed from the first 4 keys, and sensed what Valen described. Like shadows moving at the edge of vision, entities tracked our progress through the blind regions. Some felt familiar, resonating with energies similar to Jedi or Sith, while others were utterly alien, their presence in the Force unlike anything I had encountered. The awakening of the keys creates disturbances that can be detected by those sensitive to such things. Valen explained, "The guardians of the remaining sanctuaries will be aware of our approach, as will others who monitor the blind regions for signs of the gray current's return." "Who else would know of these things?" I asked. The Jedi archives contain no mention of the gray current or the Force fragmentation. There have always been those who glimpsed portions of the truth, Valen replied. Secret orders, splinter groups who broke from Jedi or Sith orthodoxy after experiencing visions or discovering fragments of ancient knowledge. Most were hunted down or died out, their insights lost or deliberately suppressed. But some survive, waiting and watching for signs that the time of reunification approaches. Our vessel slowed as we approached what appeared to be a massive spherical construct, its surface covered in geometric patterns that shifted and rearranged themselves continuously. Unlike the previous sanctuaries, this one showed signs of recent activity, energy patterns flowing across its surface like circuitry, systems awakening in response to our arrival. "The 5th sanctuary," Valen said with reverence, "the sphere of consciousness, where the Celestials studied the relationship between Force sensitivity and sentient awareness." The vessel docked with the sphere, attaching to a port that formed specifically to receive us. As we disembarked, I sensed the entire structure responding to our presence, systems dormant for millennia activating in sequence, energies flowing through conduits that lined the corridors we traversed. The interior of the sphere was a labyrinth of chambers and hallways, each dedicated to a different aspect of Force consciousness. In one room, suspended animation pods contained preserved specimens of species I had never encountered, each labeled with data concerning their Force sensitivity and cognitive structure. In another, holographic displays showed the neural pathways of various beings as they connected with the Force, revealing patterns of activation that corresponded to different Force abilities. At the center of the sphere lay a chamber unlike any I had seen. Its walls were lined with what appeared to be pure kyber crystal, forming a perfect resonance chamber that amplified and focused Force energy. In the center floated a device of incredible complexity, a mechanism that somehow interfaced directly with consciousness itself. "The Thought Forge," Valen whispered. "Here, the Celestials learn to transfer consciousness between bodies, to create Force constructs inhabited by sentient awareness, even to divide a single consciousness among multiple vessels." The tetrahedron of keys floated from my possession toward the Thought Forge, its energy interacting with the ancient device. As they connected, the entire chamber illuminated with blinding intensity, and I felt my consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of my physical form. Suddenly I perceived the galaxy, not as a collection of separate stars, planets, and beings, but as a single interconnected organism, every part influencing and being influenced by the whole. The Force flowed not just through living things, but through all matter and energy, connecting all of existence in patterns of breathtaking complexity. Most astonishing was the realization that what I had always perceived as the Force, this energy field that Jedi learned to sense and manipulate, was itself aware, not in the limited way of individual consciousness, bound by perspective and experience, but in a distributed collective manner that encompassed all things simultaneously. And this awareness was fragmented, divided against itself in ways that created fundamental disharmony throughout the galaxy. I sensed how this broken consciousness influenced events on scales both cosmic and personal, how the constant struggle between light and dark aspects of the Force reflected this inner division, this wounded awareness seeking wholeness. The vision shifted, focusing now on individual beings throughout galactic history who had glimpsed aspects of this truth. I saw Jedi who questioned orthodox teachings being silenced or expelled, Sith, whose explorations led them toward balance rather than darkness, hunted by their own kind, scholars and mystics from civilizations across the galaxy who independently discovered fragments of the truth, only to have their findings suppressed or destroyed by those who feared what they represented. Then came the most profound revelation. These glimpses of truth, these moments of clarity, experienced by beings across time and space, were not accidents but deliberate communications from the Force itself. Like a wounded mind sending signals to heal itself, the Force had been reaching out to those who might understand, guiding them toward the knowledge needed for its eventual restoration. The vision expanded further, and I witnessed how certain bloodlines throughout galactic history had been subtly influenced by this fragmented consciousness, producing beings of unusual Force sensitivity or unique abilities. The Skywalker lineage, the Shan family, and dozens of others across millennia had been touched by the Force's own will, guided toward moments of potential balance. What the Jedi called prophecies, what the Sith interpreted as omens, what countless cultures across the galaxy experienced as visions or divine guidance, all were expressions of this greater awareness attempting to communicate across the barriers of fragmentation. And then I understood something so fundamental, so shocking, that it threatened to overwhelm my sanity. Reality itself, the physical laws that govern the universe, the very structure of space and time, were not immutable constants, but conditions resulting from the Force's fragmented state. Before the sundering, when the gray current flowed in its full power, reality had been more fluid, more responsive to consciousness. The division of the Force had created the rigid framework of physical law as a kind of stabilizing structure, a compromise that allowed existence to continue in the absence of true balance. The vision receded, leaving me gasping on the floor of the chamber. The tetrahedron of keys, now joined by a fifth, forming a structure of increasing complexity that pulsed with energies that made the very air shimmer around it. Valen knelt beside me, their form shifting more rapidly now, as if the energies unleashed in the chamber had weakened whatever allowed them to maintain a consistent appearance. "You have seen it," they said, voice resonating with multiple harmonics. The fundamental truth that the Jedi and Sith could never accept, that reality itself is but a shadow of what once was and what might be again. "It is too much," I whispered, struggling to contain the enormity of what I had witnessed within the limited framework of language. No single mind was meant to comprehend such things. That is why the keys were divided. Valen agreed. The full knowledge, taken in at once, would shatter most consciousnesses. Even now, you have glimpsed only aspects of the whole, filtered through perceptions evolved to function within the current framework of reality. As I struggled to my feet, the pentahedral key formation floated before me, its complex geometries somehow helping to stabilize my thoughts, to integrate what I had experienced into a form my mind could process without breaking. "There is something else," I said, as new understanding crystallized within me, something feeding on the Force's fragmented state, something that entered our reality through the weaknesses created by the sundering. Valen's form briefly stabilized, their expression grave, the void dwellers. Yes, they are not merely predators drawn to force energy, but parasites that thrive on disharmony. The imbalance between light and dark sustains them, and they have worked subtly throughout history to maintain and deepen that imbalance. The chamber around us trembled slightly, the crystalline walls vibrating in response to some distant disturbance. Warning indicators activated throughout the sphere, ancient defense systems coming online after millennia of dormancy. They sense what has happened here, Valen said urgently. The awakening of the fifth key, the revelations you have experienced, these create ripples in the force that attract their attention. What exactly are they? I asked, moving toward the chamber exit as the trembling intensified. The priestess showed visions, but I still do not understand their true nature. They are to the force what disease is to living tissue. Valen explained as we hurried through corridors now pulsing with warning lights. Entities from a dimension where consciousness and energy exist in forms we cannot fully comprehend. They entered our reality through the weaknesses created by the Force's fragmentation, and they feed on the disharmony this causes, growing stronger as the imbalance deepens. We reached the docking port where our vessel waited, its organic systems already alert and prepared for immediate departure. As we boarded, I glanced back at the sphere, now surrounded by distortions in space that resembled heat ripples in air, only visible due to how they distorted the starfield behind them. The sanctuary's defenses will hold them back temporarily, Valen said, as our vessel detached and accelerated away from the sphere. But they grow bolder. They sense that the keys are being reunited, that the knowledge of reunification is being rediscovered. Through the viewport, I watched as the distortions around the sanctuary intensified, space itself seeming to fold and ripple as if under immense pressure. Then, with a flash of energy that momentarily outshone the nearest stars, the sphere's defensive systems fully activated, creating a barrier that pushed the distortions back, forcing them to retreat to the edges of perception. 2 more keys remain, I said, clutching the pentahedral formation that now pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. 2 more sanctuaries, 2 more aspects of the truth. And with each key we recover, the Void Dwellers grow more desperate to stop us, Valen added grimly. They understand what reunification would mean for them. The restoration of the gray current would close the weaknesses they exploit, potentially driving them from our reality entirely. As our vessel accelerated into the depths of the blind regions, navigating currents of force energy visible as swirling patterns through the viewports, I contemplated the magnitude of what we had uncovered. The Force itself strove for reunification, for the healing of its fragmented consciousness. The keys we sought were not merely repositories of forgotten knowledge, but components of a mechanism designed to restore cosmic balance. Yet opposing this natural healing were entities that thrived on disharmony, that had shaped galactic history in ways we were only beginning to understand, manipulating conflicts between light and dark force users to maintain the very imbalance that sustained them. And somewhere ahead lay 2 more sanctuaries, 2 more keys, and truths that would complete the pattern we had begun to discern. The fate of not just the Force but reality itself seemed to hang in the balance, dependent on whether the fragmentation could be healed before the parasites feeding upon it consumed what remained of the galaxy's vital energy. The pentahedral key formation pulsed with increasing urgency, guiding us toward the 6th sanctuary and the revelations it contained. While behind us, unseen but unmistakably present, the shadows pursued, hungry for the light we carried, and determined to extinguish it before the final truth could be revealed. Our vessel navigated the increasingly unstable regions of space, where the normal laws of physics seemed to be more suggestion than rule. The pentahedral formation of keys guided us, its resonance creating a path through distortions that would have been impossible to traverse otherwise. Behind us, the Void Dwellers pursued, their presence felt as a creeping cold at the edges of perception, a hunger that transcended physical sensation. "We cannot outrun them indefinitely," Valen said. their form now shifting almost continuously between different aspects, unable to maintain stability as we penetrated deeper into the blind regions. They exist partially outside our dimensional framework, allowing them to traverse space in ways we cannot. Then we must reach the sixth sanctuary before they can intercept us, I replied, focusing my attention on the pentahedral keys, using techniques absorbed from the first 5 to strengthen our connection to the gray current, however fragmented it might be. The vessel responded, drawing energy from currents invisible to normal senses, accelerating beyond what should have been possible. Stars blurred around us, space itself seeming to compress as we followed paths that existed between the conventional dimensions of real space. After what might have been hours or days, temporal perception being as unreliable as everything else in these regions, we approached what appeared to be a massive archive, a structure that orbited no star but drifted in the void, its architecture unlike anything found in known space. It resembled a vast tree of crystalline material, branches extending outward to form a spherical structure kilometers in diameter, each branch housing chambers and corridors that glowed with internal light. The Library of Eternity, Valen whispered reverently, the sixth sanctuary, where the Celestials preserved the complete historical record of their civilization and all that came before. Our vessel docked with one of the crystal branches, connecting to a port that formed in response to our approach. As we disembarked, I sensed the entire structure awakening, systems dormant for eons activating in sequence, responding to the presence of the 5 keys we carried. The interior was a labyrinth of crystal corridors and vast chambers, each containing records in formats both familiar and utterly alien. Some were recognizable as data storage, though of technology far beyond current galactic standards. Others appeared to be purely energetic, information encoded directly into the Force itself, accessible only to those with the perception to read it. At the heart of the structure lay a chamber dominated by a massive crystal sphere, within which swirled energies that formed and reformed into images, texts, and dimensional representations of historical events. As we entered, the pentahedral key formation floated toward this sphere, its resonance triggering a response that filled the chamber with light. The Eternal Chronicle, Valen explained, their voice hushed with awe. Here dwell the wills, beings who transcended physical form to become the living memory of the Force itself. As if summoned by these words, figures materialized around the sphere, their forms translucent and shifting, neither fully corporeal nor purely energetic. They wore robes of a design that predated any known civilization, and their faces, where visible beneath deep hoods, were serene yet alien, with features that suggested evolution in environments unlike any in known space. The Seekers come. They spoke in unison, voices resonating directly in our minds rather than through the air, carrying fragments of the sundered truth, pursuing knowledge that has slept for 100,000 generations. The pentahedral keys pulsed in response, and from within the crystal sphere emerged a 6th key, more complex in structure than any of the previous 5. It joined with our formation, creating a geometric shape of 6 interconnected crystals that rotated slowly, emitting harmonics that made the very air vibrate with potential. You seek to understand why the Force was divided. The wills continued, their forms moving in perfect synchronization around the chamber. Know then the history that has been erased, the cycles that have repeated, and the truth that lies beneath all understanding of the Force. The chamber transformed around us, the crystal walls becoming transparent to reveal a visual history that unfolded in 4 dimensions. Events flowing not just in sequence, but in parallel, showing connections across time and space that would have been impossible to perceive otherwise. I witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations that predated the Republic by tens of thousands of years, some achieving technological advancement beyond anything in the current galaxy, others developing Force traditions that approached the gray current from different angles. And throughout this vast tapestry of history, a pattern emerged, a cycle that repeated with variations but always the same essential structure. Force traditions would arise, initially balanced in their approach. Over time, they would splinter into factions, emphasizing different aspects of the Force. Conflict would follow, escalating as Force users on both sides grew more powerful and more extreme in their philosophies. Eventually, the conflict would reach a crisis point, threatening all existence, forcing a resolution that temporarily restored balance before the cycle began again. This pattern, the wills explained as the visions flowed, is not accidental but systemic, a consequence of the Force's fragmented nature. What appears as a struggle between light and dark is in truth the Force itself, seeking reunification, its divided consciousness creating the very conflicts that express its internal disharmony. The visions focused now on more recent history, showing events I recognized from Republican Jedi records, but from a perspective that revealed hidden connections and causes. The 100-Year Darkness, the Great Hyperspace War, the Jedi Civil War, all these conflicts that had shaped galactic history were shown as expressions of the Force's fragmented consciousness, attempts at reintegration that failed because participants understood only fragments of the greater truth. Most shocking was the revelation that the Jedi and Sith orders, for all their apparent opposition, were actually symbiotic expressions of the Force's division, each embodying aspects of a sundered whole, neither capable of achieving true balance alone. Their conflict, extending across millennia, was itself a manifestation of the Force's internal struggle toward wholeness. But if this cycle is intrinsic to the Force's fragmented state, I asked, struggling to process the enormity of what was being revealed, why has reunification never succeeded? Why does the pattern repeat endlessly? The wills gestured, and the visions shifted to show entities moving through the shadows of history, beings neither fully in our reality nor completely outside it. The void dwellers, parasites that fed on the energies released by Force conflicts, subtly manipulating events to perpetuate and deepen the division between light and dark traditions. They entered through the weaknesses created by the fragmentation, the wills explained, and they have worked throughout history to prevent reunification, for the restored gray current would seal the passages between dimensions, cutting them off from the energy source they have exploited for millennia. The visions continued, revealing how these entities had influenced galactic events not through direct intervention but by amplifying existing tendencies, exploiting vulnerabilities in individuals and organizations, always working to deepen rather than heal the divisions within the Force. I saw Jedi who glimpsed aspects of balance being subtly corrupted or isolated. Sith whose explorations might have led toward integration being driven toward greater extremes, entire civilizations that approached understandings of the gray current being manipulated into conflicts that destroyed their knowledge. The Jedi Order itself, the wills continued, was founded on principles derived from fragments of gray current understanding, yet over millennia, influenced by these entities, it evolved doctrines that reinforced rather than healed the Force's fragmentation. I watched as the original Jedi teachings, which had acknowledged both light and dark aspects of the Force as necessary components of a balanced whole, gradually transformed into a philosophy that rejected darkness entirely, seeking to suppress rather than integrate the full spectrum of Force experience. The Sith followed a parallel but inverse path. The wills explained, beginning with insights into aspects of the Force that Jedi rejected, but evolving into an equally imbalanced philosophy that glorified power at the expense of harmony. Both orders, for all their opposition, were revealed as incomplete expressions of a truth neither fully comprehended, each possessing pieces of a puzzle neither could solve alone, and behind their millennial conflict lurked entities that thrived on their opposition, feeding on the energies released by their battles, both physical and philosophical. The chosen bloodlines, Valen whispered beside me. their form momentarily stabilizing as they absorbed these revelations. They were the Force's attempts to break this cycle. The wills nodded in unison. Throughout history, the Force has manifested individuals of unusual potential, beings capable of bridging the artificial division between light and dark. These manifestations represent the Force's own consciousness attempting to heal itself, to restore the balance shattered by the original fragmentation. The visions showed these individuals across time and space, beings born with connections to the Force that transcended orthodox understanding. Some had become legendary figures in Jedi or Sith history. Others had founded their own traditions that briefly flourished before being suppressed, and some had lived and died in obscurity, their potential never fully realized. The prophecy of the Chosen One, I said, suddenly understanding connections previously hidden. It was one such attempt, one of many, the wills confirmed. The being you know as Anakin Skywalker represented a confluence of Force energy specifically manifested to challenge the entrenched division. His potential to unify the sundered aspects of the Force threatened the Void Dwellers as few things have in millennia. I watched as this tragedy unfolded, seeing how factors both internal and external had driven the Chosen One toward decisions that temporarily deepened rather than healed the division he was born to resolve. Yet even in failure, his bloodline continued to carry the potential for balance, manifesting in descendants who would face their own tests and choices. Why show us this now? I asked, as the visions receded, leaving us once again in the crystal chamber with the wills. Why reveal these connections after they have been hidden for so long? Because the cycle approaches a culmination point, they replied, their forms growing more translucent, as if maintaining their manifestation required increasing effort. The barriers between dimensions weaken. The Void Dwellers grow stronger, consuming more Force energy than ever before. If the pattern is not broken, if balance is not restored, the consequences will extend beyond this galaxy to threaten all existence. The hexahedral key formation pulsed with increasing intensity, its resonance creating ripples in the Force that extended outward, detectable by any sensitive to such energies. I understood then that our quest had never been secret, that each key we recovered broadcast its awakening across dimensions, alerting both potential allies and determined enemies to our progress. The final key awaits, the wills said, their voices becoming distant as their forms faded further. With it comes the knowledge of how reunification might be achieved, how the gray current could be restored, and the Force's consciousness made whole once more. And the Void Dwellers? Valen asked. They will oppose us with everything at their disposal. They already gather, came the reply, barely audible now, as the wills faded almost completely from perception. Drawn by the awakening of the 6 keys, they mass at the boundaries of this dimension, seeking entry points, weaknesses they can exploit. The final sanctuary lies at the nexus of all Force currents, the point where the original fragmentation occurred. To reach it, you must pass through regions where the barriers between dimensions are thinnest, where their influence is strongest. How can we hope to succeed against entities that have manipulated galactic history for millennia? I asked, feeling the weight of what we faced. The will's reply came as a whisper at the edge of perception. The keys themselves are weapons as well as knowledge. United, they begin to restore aspects of the gray current, allowing access to powers long forgotten. Use this wisely, for the final key can only be claimed by those who understand that true balance lies not in the absence of darkness or the triumph of light, but in the harmony of all aspects of the Force. And then they were gone, their presence fading from the chamber as the hexahedral key formation floated back to hover between Valen and me, pulsing with energies that seemed to bend light around it, creating patterns that shifted between dimensions. We should leave quickly, Valen said. Their form now almost completely unstable, features flowing between different aspects so rapidly they appeared as a blur. The library's defenses will activate soon to repel the approaching entities, but they were designed for a different age, against threats less evolved than what now pursues us. As if confirming these words, alarms sounded throughout the crystal structure, ancient systems activating defensive protocols dormant for millennia. Through the transparent walls, I could see distortions forming in space around the library, ripples that suggested movement between dimensions rather than through normal space. We hurried back through crystal corridors now pulsing with warning indicators, the entire structure vibrating with energies being channeled into defensive systems. Our vessel awaited at the docking port, its organic systems already alert and prepared for immediate departure. As we boarded, I glanced back at the library, now surrounded by distortions that bent light around them, making portions of the structure appear to vanish and reappear as the fabric of space itself warped under unnatural pressures. "The nexus of balance," Valen said, as our vessel detached and accelerated away from the library. "The final sanctuary lies at the very point where the force was originally fragmented, a location that exists partially outside normal space-time. The Void Dwellers will marshal all their strength to prevent us from reaching it." Through the viewport, I watched as the library's defensive systems fully engaged, the entire crystal structure glowing with energies that pushed back against the encroaching distortions. Beams of pure force energy lanced outward, striking at targets invisible to normal perception, but unmistakably present in the ripples they created through the fabric of reality. "Can the wills withstand them?" I asked, sensing the tremendous energies being exchanged in the battle unfolding behind us. "The wills exist beyond physical form," Valen replied, their voice resonating with multiple harmonics as their appearance continued to shift. "They cannot be destroyed, as we understand destruction, but the library itself, the knowledge it contains beyond what the wills embody, that is vulnerable. The Void Dwellers would consume it if they could, absorbing the energies of millions of years of accumulated wisdom." Our vessel accelerated to speeds that should have been impossible, drawing power from the hexahedral key formation that now interfaced directly with its organic systems. Space blurred around us as we followed currents in the force itself, navigating pathways that existed between the conventional dimensions of real space. Ahead lay the final sanctuary, the nexus of balance, where the force had been sundered and where perhaps it might be made whole again. Behind us, ancient entities pursued, determined to prevent the restoration that would threaten their parasitic existence. And throughout the galaxy, though none yet realized it, the fate of all things hung in balance, dependent on whether the force's fragmented consciousness could finally be healed. The hexahedral key formation pulsed with a rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. 6 fragments of a greater whole preparing for reunion with the 7th and final piece. Whatever awaited us at the nexus of balance, I knew with absolute certainty that the journey there would test not just our understanding, but our very conception of what was possible in a universe shaped by forces beyond mortal comprehension. Our vessel traveled paths that existed between conventional dimensions, following currents in the force that connected regions of space in ways impossible to map through normal navigation. The hexahedral key formation guided us, its resonance creating openings in the fabric of reality itself, allowing passage through shortcuts that bypassed millions of light-years of normal space. Yet despite this impossible speed, I sensed the pursuers gaining ground, their presence growing stronger at the edges of perception, a cold hunger that transcended physical sensation. The Void Dwellers, entities that existed partially outside our dimensional framework, could traverse these between spaces with an efficiency we could not match. "We cannot reach the nexus of balance before they intercept us," Valen said, their form now a constantly shifting blur of features and aspects, the proximity to so much gray current energy making it impossible for them to maintain a stable appearance. "We must seek sanctuary briefly, gather allies who can help us complete the final approach." The vessel responded to this thought, altering course slightly to follow a current that led toward what appeared to be a small planetoid drifting in a region where multiple force streams converged. Unlike the previous sanctuaries, this place radiated no technological signatures, appearing as nothing more than a barren rock floating in the void. The gathering place, Valen explained as we approached. Not a sanctuary of the keys, but a nexus where those who walk between traditions have met in secret throughout the ages. Our vessel landed on a flat plain of dark stone, the surface unmarked by any sign of civilization or habitation. Yet as we disembarked, I sensed presences approaching, beings who had masked their existence in the Force with techniques unlike any taught by Jedi or Sith. From behind rock formations and out of shallow caves emerged figures in robes of various designs, some reminiscent of Jedi attire, others bearing elements of Sith aesthetics, and many incorporating styles from traditions I did not recognize. What united them was a subtle resonance in the Force, a balanced energy, neither fully light nor completely dark, but containing elements of both in varying proportions. One figure stepped forward, an elderly human woman whose simple gray robes bore no insignia of any order, yet who carried herself with the quiet authority of one who had witnessed the turning of ages. Her Force signature was unlike any I had encountered, neither the serene light of Jedi Masters nor the turbulent power of Sith Lords, but something that flowed between these polarities with effortless grace. "I am Serena Vala," she introduced herself, her voice carrying the slight accent of the mid-rim. "Once Jedi Knight, once Sith Acolyte, now Walker of the Middle Path. We have awaited your arrival since the first key awakened." The hexahedral key formation floated forward slightly, pulsing in a pattern that seemed to communicate directly with Serena and the gathered figures. In response, they lowered hoods and removed masks to reveal a diverse collection of species from across the galaxy, many bearing scars or modifications that spoke of lives spent in conflict and search. "These are the Seekers of Balance," Valen explained, their form momentarily stabilizing out of respect for the gathering. Force sensitives who throughout history have glimpsed fragments of the truth we now pursue. Some are centuries old, preserved by techniques forgotten by both Jedi and Sith. Others are more recent converts to the Middle Path, drawn by visions or personal revelations that exposed the limitations of orthodox teachings. Serena gestured toward a formation of stones that created a natural amphitheater in the planetoid's surface. "Come, time grows short, and there is much wisdom to share before you face the final trial." We followed the assembled seekers to this circle of stones, where they arranged themselves in a formation that somehow amplified the Force energies flowing through the planetoid. The hexahedral key formation floated to the center, its complex geometries rotating slowly as it absorbed and redistributed the ambient energy. "For millennia, we have preserved fragments of knowledge concerning the gray current," Serena began, her voice carrying easily through the still air. "Some of us were Jedi who questioned orthodox teachings and were expelled for our heresies. Others were Sith who sought power, not for domination but understanding, and found themselves hunted by their own kind. Many come from traditions outside either order, Force users from cultures that developed their own approaches to balance. One by one, the assembled seekers shared their knowledge, each contributing pieces to a mosaic that expanded my understanding of what we sought. A former Jedi archivist revealed texts expunged from the official records, documenting cases where Jedi had accessed gray current abilities in moments of extreme need. A one-time Sith Lord described techniques for channeling emotions without being consumed by them, achieving states of focused passion that enhanced Force connections without descending into corruption. Most valuable were the contributions from traditions outside the Jedi-Sith paradigm entirely. A Night Sister shared wisdom concerning the communal aspect of the Force, how connections between practitioners could amplify individual abilities. A Bardatan sage explained techniques for perceiving the Force as music rather than light or dark energy, hearing harmonies that transcended moral polarities. As each seeker shared their knowledge, the hexahedral key formation absorbed and integrated these diverse perspectives, its resonance shifting to encompass a wider range of frequencies. I sensed the keys learning from these beings, incorporating their understanding into the greater pattern they represented. The gray current is not merely power, but perspective, Serena explained. As the sharing continued, it requires not just the ability to channel both light and dark aspects of the Force, but the wisdom to understand that these distinctions are themselves illusions created by limited perception. Yet the greatest challenge lies not in accessing this power, but in withstanding it, added an ancient Syrian, whose Force signature suggested centuries of meditation and study. The undivided Force communicates directly with consciousness in ways that can overwhelm minds evolved to function within the current fragmented framework. This is why the keys were created, not just as repositories of knowledge, but as interfaces that allow limited, controlled access to aspects of the gray current. The sharing of wisdom continued as the seekers built upon each other's insights, creating a tapestry of understanding that filled gaps in the knowledge provided by the 6 keys. I learned techniques for maintaining mental stability when exposed to expanded Force awareness, methods for integrating seemingly contradictory aspects of light and dark without internal conflict, and approaches to perceiving reality beyond the limitations of conventional physics. Throughout this exchange, I sensed Valen absorbing everything with intense focus, their constantly shifting form somehow expressing deep recognition, as if much of what was shared confirmed knowledge they had long suspected but never fully articulated. As the sharing neared its conclusion, Serena turned her attention directly to me, her gaze penetrating as if seeing beyond physical appearance to the essence beneath. You were chosen for this journey. Not by accident, but by the Force itself. Your particular blend of qualities, strengths, and even what you might consider weaknesses creates a unique resonance suited to the task of accessing the final key. What qualities? I asked, uncertain what made me different from countless other Force sensitives who might have undertaken this quest. Balance, she replied simply. Not perfection, not extraordinary power, but a natural tendency toward equilibrium. Your journey through Jedi training never fully suppressed your capacity for emotion. Your explorations beyond orthodox teachings never led you to embrace darkness for its own sake. You question without rejecting, accept without abandoning discernment. Before I could respond, the gathering was interrupted by a sudden chill that swept through the amphitheater, a cold that penetrated to the bone and beyond, touching something deeper than physical sensation. The assembled seekers rose as one, turning outward to face the darkness that now gathered at the edges of the planetoid. "They have found us sooner than expected," Serena said, her voice calm despite the palpable threat approaching. The Void Dwellers sensed the concentration of Force energy here, drawn by the keys and our combined presence. Through the thin atmosphere, I saw distortions forming in space around the planetoid, ripples that bent light in unnatural ways, suggesting movement between dimensions rather than through normal space. Within these distortions, shapes became visible, entities of shadow and absence that seemed to consume the very light that touched them. "We must protect the keys until you can reach the final sanctuary," Serena declared, drawing a lightsaber, unlike any I had seen. Its blade neither the pure blue or green of Jedi weapons, nor the crimson of Sith, but a silver tinged with hints of multiple colors that shifted as she moved it. Around the circle, other seekers revealed their own weapons and prepared defensive stances. "Can we fight such entities?" I asked, sensing the alien nature of what approached, so different from any adversary I had faced or even imagined. "Not defeat them permanently," Valen answered, their form solidifying somewhat as they prepared for conflict, "but repel them temporarily." The void dwellers cannot fully manifest in our dimension without vessels to inhabit or energies to consume. Their strength here is limited by the barriers between realities, barriers that ironically exist because of the Force's fragmented state. The distortions grew more pronounced, space itself seeming to tear open in places, revealing glimpses of a dimension beyond our own, a place of swirling shadows and hungry awareness. From these tears emerged tendrils of darkness that reached toward us, probing the defenses of the gathered seekers. What followed was a battle unlike any recorded in Jedi or Sith archives. The Seekers formed a circle around the hexahedral key formation, channeling Force energies in a unified pattern that created a barrier against the encroaching shadows. Their lightsabers cut through tendrils of darkness that managed to penetrate this shield, each strike releasing bursts of energy as dimensional barriers reasserted themselves around the severed connections. I joined their defense, drawing on techniques absorbed from the six keys and the shared wisdom of the Seekers. For the first time, I consciously accessed aspects of both light and dark Force energy simultaneously, not as separate tools, but as complementary expressions of a unified power. The sensation was exhilarating and terrifying, my perception expanding to encompass multiple levels of reality simultaneously. Through this enhanced awareness, I perceived the true nature of our attackers more clearly. The Void Dwellers were not merely predators but parasites on a cosmic scale, entities that had evolved in a dimension where consciousness and energy existed in forms unimaginable to beings from our reality. They had discovered our universe during the original fragmentation of the Force, when the barriers between dimensions were momentarily weakened, and had insinuated themselves into the gaps created by this cosmic wound. For millennia, they had fed on the energies released by the Force's internal conflict, growing stronger as the imbalance between light and dark deepened. They had influenced galactic history not through direct intervention, but by amplifying existing tendencies, exacerbating conflicts, ensuring that any approach toward true balance was diverted or corrupted before it could challenge their parasitic existence. The battle intensified as more Void Dwellers pressed against the thinning dimensional barriers, drawn by the concentration of Force energy and the threat represented by the keys. The Seekers fought with everything they possessed, combining techniques from dozens of traditions into a unified defense that momentarily held back the encroaching darkness. "You must go now," Sirena commanded. "During a brief respite in the assault, we will create an opening for your vessel, a corridor through their forces. The hexahedral key will guide you to the nexus of balance. Whatever happens here, you must reach the final sanctuary and complete what was begun." "I cannot abandon you to face them alone," I protested, witnessing the toll the battle was taking on even the most powerful Seekers. "This is why we exist," she replied with serene certainty. Throughout history, the Seekers of Balance have preserved knowledge, passed down techniques, trained in secret for this moment. We are the guardians who stand between dimensions, who maintain what balance remains while awaiting the possibility of restoration. This is not abandonment but fulfillment. Around the circle, the other Seekers nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting not fear but resolution, the calm acceptance of those who understand their place in a greater pattern. Valen placed a hand on my shoulder, their form briefly stabilizing into something almost human. "They offer us the greatest gift they can. We honor them by accepting it and completing our journey." With a heavy heart, I bowed to Sirena and the assembled Seekers. The hexahedral key formation floated back to hover between Valen and me as we retreated toward our vessel, which had positioned itself for immediate departure. Behind us, the Seekers of Balance channeled their combined power into a massive surge of Force energy, creating a shockwave that temporarily pushed back the dimensional tiers and the entities emerging from them. In that moment of cleared space, our vessel launched, accelerating away from the planetoid along a path illuminated by the resonance of the six keys. Through the viewport, I watched as the Seekers formed a perfect circle, their weapons raised in salute as they prepared for the next wave of assault. The Void Dwellers surged forward once more, shadows engulfing the planetoid as the dimensional barriers thinned further under their relentless pressure. Then distance and the distortions of accelerated space obscured the view, leaving only the certainty that beings of tremendous courage and wisdom fought a desperate battle to buy us time, to create the opportunity for a greater victory than they themselves could achieve. The hexahedral key formation pulsed with increased urgency, guiding our vessel toward the final destination, the nexus of balance, where the force had been fragmented and where, perhaps, it might be made whole again. The wisdom gathered from the Seekers integrated with the knowledge contained in the 6 keys, creating a more complete understanding of what awaited and what might be possible. Yet even as we raced toward this culmination point, the shadows pursued, diminished but not defeated by the Seekers' sacrifice. The final confrontation still awaited, at the very heart of the mystery that had driven our quest from the beginning. And whatever the outcome, I knew that nothing in the galaxy would remain unchanged by what was about to unfold. The vessel carried us through regions of space that defied conventional physics, following currents in the force that existed between the established dimensions of real space. Guided by the hexahedral key formation, we traversed distances that should have taken years in mere hours, crossing boundaries between sectors with a fluidity impossible through normal hyperspace travel. Yet despite this extraordinary speed, the shadows pursued, entities moving not through space, but between the layers of reality itself. The Void Dwellers, diminished but not defeated by the Seekers' defense, continued their relentless hunt, drawn by the resonance of the 6 keys and the threat they represented to the parasite's existence. We approached the threshold, Violen said, their form now a constantly shifting amalgamation of features and aspects, the proximity to so much gray current energy making it impossible for them to maintain any stable appearance. Beyond lies the nexus of balance, the point where all force currents converge. Through the viewport, I witnessed a phenomenon unlike anything recorded in astronomical databases. Ahead loomed what appeared to be a collapsed star, a singularity around which space itself curved in impossible geometries. Yet unlike a conventional black hole, this entity emitted visible energy across all spectrums, creating a corona of light that shifted through colors both familiar and utterly alien. The nexus exists partially within the singularity, Valen explained, as our vessel decelerated, approaching this cosmic anomaly with caution, a place where the conventional laws of physics break down completely, where the original nature of reality before the force's fragmentation can still be glimpsed. The hexahedral key formation pulsed with increasing intensity as we drew closer, its resonance creating ripples in the force fields that surrounded our vessel, protecting it from the extreme gravitational forces that should have torn any conventional craft apart. "How do we proceed?" I asked, witnessing the swirling energies that surrounded the collapsed star, currents of power that would incinerate any physical object that entered their flow. "Not as physical beings," Valen replied, placing a hand that constantly shifted form on the control panel of our vessel. "The final approach cannot be made in corporeal form. We must follow the path of consciousness alone, guided by the keys." The hexahedral formation floated between us, its complex geometries rotating in patterns that seemed to bend the light around it, creating openings in perception that revealed layers of reality previously invisible. Following an instinct that transcended rational thought, I reached out to touch the formation, feeling Violen do the same from the opposite side. The moment of contact triggered a transformation beyond anything I had experienced. My consciousness expanded explosively, no longer bound by the limitations of physical form or conventional perception. I existed simultaneously in multiple states, awareness extending across dimensions that had no names in any language known to the galaxy. Beside me, or perhaps within me, I sensed Valen's presence, their true nature now revealed as something far more complex than the humanoid form they had adopted. They were a construct of pure force energy, a fragment of consciousness preserved from an age before the fragmentation, given temporary form to serve as guide and guardian for this journey. Together, our expanded consciousness followed the resonance of the 6 keys, drawing us toward the heart of the singularity where conventional reality broke down completely. We passed through layers of increasingly primal energy, witnessing the fundamental forces of the universe in their raw, undifferentiated state. At the very center of this cosmic maelstrom waited the final sanctuary, not a physical structure, but a nexus of pure force energy that existed outside normal space-time, and floating within this nexus, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the universe itself, was the 7th key, more complex in its geometry than all the others combined. As our consciousness approached this final key, it responded, extending filaments of energy that connected with the hexahedral formation we carried. The moment of connection triggered a cataclysmic release of power, a wave of energy that rippled outward through all dimensions simultaneously. In that instant of perfect resonance between all 7 keys, a vision unfolded before us, more comprehensive and profound than anything revealed by the previous sanctuaries. I witnessed the true history of the Force, not as an impersonal energy field, but as a living consciousness that predated the universe itself. The Force had not merely existed since the beginning of time, it had been instrumental in the very creation of reality as we understood it. What beings across the galaxy perceived as separate forces, as distinct aspects of physical law, were in truth expressions of a single unified consciousness exploring its own nature through infinite variations of experience. This consciousness had originally existed in perfect harmony, encompassing all polarities within a balanced whole, light and dark, creation and destruction, order and chaos, all were recognized as necessary components of a greater unity, complementary expressions rather than opposing forces. But as sentient life evolved throughout the cosmos, as beings capable of connecting with this consciousness developed their own awareness, a strange resonance occurred. The limited perspectives of these finite minds began to influence the infinite awareness they touched, creating ripples of imbalance in what had been perfect harmony. The Celestials, among the first species to develop force sensitivity on a significant scale, achieved a profound connection with this consciousness, accessing abilities that transcended conventional physics. Yet even they perceived the Force through the lens of their own biases and limitations, emphasizing certain aspects while diminishing others. Over millennia, as more species developed force sensitivity, these ripples of disharmony intensified. The unified consciousness of the Force began to fragment along lines defined by how it was perceived and utilized by finite minds. What had been wholeness became division, not through any inherent schism, but through the accumulated effect of limited perspectives imposing their understanding on an unlimited awareness. Then came the void dwellers, entities from a dimension where consciousness existed in forms utterly alien to our universe. Drawn by the emerging divisions within the Force, they discovered they could feed on the energies released by this internal disharmony. Like parasites exploiting a wound, they insinuated themselves into the gaps created by the fragmentation, consuming the power generated by conflict between opposing aspects of what had once been unified. The Celestials, recognizing the existential threat these parasites represented, attempted to restore balance, to heal the fragmentation before it progressed beyond recovery. But the void dwellers, already strengthening from the energies they consumed, worked to deepen the divisions, amplifying conflicts and corrupting those who sought reunification. What followed was a war that transcended physical battle, fought across dimensions and throughout the fabric of reality itself. The Celestials, wielding powers beyond anything known to current Force users, confronted the Void Dwellers directly, attempting to drive them back to their native dimension and seal the passages between realities. But the conflict itself generated precisely the energies the parasites fed upon, making them stronger even as they were opposed. As the war escalated, the very structure of the universe was threatened, fundamental forces destabilizing under the pressure of powers never meant to be wielded in opposition. In desperation, 7 Celestials formulated a plan not to defeat the Void Dwellers directly, but to deny them their food source. They would deliberately fragment the Force along controlled lines, creating barriers between its aspects that would prevent the kind of total reunification the parasites exploited, while preserving the knowledge of how these barriers might someday be dissolved when the threat had passed. The 7 keys were created from the essence of these Celestials, each containing a portion of their consciousness and knowledge, designed to be scattered across the galaxy and hidden until a time when conditions might allow for safe reunification. The fragmentation ritual succeeded, dividing the once unified Force into aspects that most beings would come to know as separate and opposing philosophies, the light and dark sides of the Force. This division was never meant to be permanent, but a desperate measure to preserve existence itself at the cost of its original fluid nature. Reality, as most beings understood it, with its seemingly immutable physical laws and linear progression of time, was itself a consequence of this fragmentation, a more rigid framework that replaced the dynamic, responsive cosmos that had existed before. The Void Dwellers, unable to feed as efficiently on the divided Force, retreated to the margins between dimensions. Their influence diminished but not eliminated. Throughout subsequent history, they worked to maintain and deepen the divisions that sustained them, subtly influencing Force traditions toward greater extremes of light or dark, ensuring that any approach toward true balance was corrupted or destroyed before it could threaten their parasitic existence. Yet the Force itself, though fragmented, retained an underlying unity, its divided consciousness constantly seeking reunification despite the barriers erected to protect it. Throughout galactic history, this drive toward wholeness manifested in various ways, from prophecies about chosen ones who would bring balance, to individuals born with unusual connections, to aspects of the Force normally considered separate or opposed. The vision shifted, showing how this cosmic drama had played out across millennia of galactic history. The founding of the Jedi Order, originally inspired by glimpses of the greater truth, but gradually narrowing into a philosophy that emphasized light to the exclusion of darkness. The Sith Schism, beginning as a legitimate challenge to Jedi limitations, but corrupted into an equally imbalanced embrace of darkness alone. Countless other Force traditions rising and falling across the galaxy, each capturing fragments of the original unity, but none achieving the complete balance that existed before the sundering. Most poignant were the moments where reunification nearly occurred, where individuals or groups approached understandings that might have begun the healing process. In each case, the Void Dwellers had intervened, sometimes directly but more often through subtle manipulation of fears, ambitions, and conflicts already present. Heroes became villains, visionaries became tyrants, and movements toward balance became new sources of division, all serving to maintain the fragmented state that sustained the parasites. A whisper in the cosmic void, I recalled from the beginning of our journey, now understanding the true significance of those words. And the void itself trembled with the thunder of revelation as the full pattern became clear, the ancient whisper growing into a storm across eternity as the 7 keys resonated in perfect harmony. The vision culminated with a revelation so profound it threatened to overwhelm even our expanded consciousness. The Force itself was evolving despite its fragmentation, its divided aspects, learning and growing through interaction with the myriad beings who connected with it. What had begun as a desperate measure to preserve existence had become a crucible for transformation, the fragmented Force developing complexities and possibilities that had not existed in its original unified state. Reunification, therefore, would not merely restore what once was but create something entirely new, a synthesis that incorporated all that had been learned and experienced during the long era of division. The gray current sought by ancient traditions was not the end but the beginning of a new phase in the Force's evolution, one that might transcend even the perfect balance that existed before the sundering. As the vision receded, we found ourselves once more before the seventh key. Our consciousness still expanded beyond normal limits, but gradually returning to a state that could interface with physical reality. The hexahedral formation we had carried merged with this final key, creating a structure of perfect geometric complexity, a crystalline embodiment of the complete knowledge of fragmentation and potential reunification. The choice now stands before us, Valen communicated, their presence now revealed as a fragment of one of the original 7 celestials, preserved within a construct of force energy to guide whoever might eventually rediscover the keys. The knowledge of how reunification might be achieved is now complete, but implementing it brings consequences beyond calculation. I understood the dilemma with perfect clarity. To restore the gray current, to heal the Force's fragmented consciousness, would fundamentally alter reality as all beings in the galaxy understood it. Physical laws would become more fluid, time itself more malleable, as the rigid framework created by the fragmentation dissolved. And while this restoration might eventually drive the Void Dwellers from our reality, the transition period would create precisely the kind of energetic instability they thrived upon, potentially allowing them a final feast of unprecedented magnitude before the barriers between dimensions could be resealed. Yet to leave the Force fragmented meant accepting the continued parasitic presence of the Void Dwellers, allowing them to feed indefinitely on the disharmony created by division. It meant perpetuating a cosmic wound that affected all existence, limiting the potential of every being connected to the Force and maintaining a cycle of conflict that had defined galactic history for millennia. The completed key formation pulsed between us, awaiting a decision that would affect not just the galaxy but reality itself. And in that moment of perfect knowledge and terrible responsibility, I sensed presences gathering around us, entities drawn to this nexus point by the resonance of the united keys and the possibility of either feast or famine that our choice represented. The Void Dwellers had found us at the heart of the singularity, at the very point where all Force currents converged. Their shadowy presence encircled our expanded consciousness, not yet attacking but poised to strike, awaiting the moment when decision became action and the final battle for the fate of the Force would begin. The choice that had driven our quest from the beginning now lay fully revealed in all its complexity and consequence. And whatever path we chose, nothing in the galaxy would remain unchanged by what was about to unfold at this nexus of cosmic balance. This point where past and future, creation and destruction, light and darkness all converged in perfect, terrible symmetry. The Void Dwellers circled our expanded consciousness, entities of shadow and hunger that existed between the layers of reality itself. Their presence created distortions in the Force currents that flowed through the heart of the singularity, ripples of cold absence that threatened to consume the very energy that sustained our non-physical form. The completed key formation, a geometric structure of perfect complexity representing the united knowledge of the 7 celestials, pulsed between us with increasing urgency. Within its crystalline matrices lay the complete understanding of how the Force had been fragmented and how it might be restored, knowledge sought by both preservers and destroyers for millennia. They cannot directly assault us here, at the heart of the Nexus. Valen communicated, their presence now fully revealed as a fragment of celestial consciousness preserved through ages. But neither can we remain indefinitely. A decision must be made. A path chosen. I contemplated the options revealed by our journey, each fraught with consequences beyond calculation: to activate the united keys, to to initiate the process of reunification would fundamentally alter the fabric of reality throughout the galaxy. The barriers between aspects of the Force would gradually dissolve, allowing the fragmented consciousness to heal, to become whole once more. Yet this process would release energies of inconceivable magnitude, creating precisely the kind of instability the Void Dwellers fed upon. Before reunification could complete, before the restored gray current could seal the passages between dimensions, the parasites would feast as never before, potentially growing powerful enough to resist expulsion even from a unified force. To choose this path meant accepting that countless beings throughout the galaxy would experience a reality in flux, physical laws becoming less reliable, time itself flowing less linearly. Those with Force sensitivity would be particularly affected, suddenly connecting with aspects of the Force they had never experienced. Potentially overwhelming minds evolved to function within the fragmented framework. The alternative seemed equally daunting. To leave the Force in its fragmented state meant accepting the continued parasitic presence of the Void Dwellers, allowing them to feed indefinitely on the disharmony created by division. It meant perpetuating a cosmic wound that affected all existence, limiting the potential of every being connected to the Force, and maintaining a cycle of conflict that had defined galactic history for millennia. There must be another way, I projected, searching the knowledge contained within the United Keys for a solution that might avoid both catastrophic outcomes. The Celestials themselves realized that direct confrontation strengthened the parasites. There must be a path that neither maintains fragmentation nor triggers a feeding frenzy during reunification. The United Keys pulsed in response, their resonance shifting to reveal aspects of knowledge previously hidden, connections between seemingly separate concepts that suggested a third approach, one not envisioned even by the original Celestials in their desperate effort to preserve existence. Gradual integration, Valen realized, their consciousness expanding as they perceived the pattern emerging from the unified knowledge. Not sudden reunification, not permanent division, but a controlled, progressive healing that would strengthen barriers against the Void Dwellers even as it dissolved barriers between aspects of the Force. The concept unfolded between us, a possible path forward that had not existed before the Keys were united. The Force could be healed not through a single cataclysmic event but through a process extended across time and space, beginning at specific nexus points and gradually spreading throughout the galaxy. This approach would allow the consciousness of living beings to adapt to the changes, preventing the kind of shock that might drive minds toward extremes of light or dark. Most crucially, this gradual integration would generate energies in patterns the Void Dwellers could not efficiently consume, creating ripples in the Force that would strengthen dimensional barriers even as they healed the divisions within our reality. The parasites would find their food source diminishing rather than expanding, their connection to our dimension weakening with each step toward balance. The 7 keys must be separated once more. Valen communicated as the full pattern became clear. Not hidden as before, but placed at 7 nexus points throughout the galaxy, each serving as a focus for this gradual healing. From these points, the gray current would begin to flow once more, spreading outward at a pace that allows both the Force and those connected to it to adapt harmoniously. The United Keys resonated with this insight, their structure shifting to suggest how they might be reconfigured for this new purpose. No longer merely repositories of knowledge, they would become active conduits for the gray current, drawing fragmented aspects of the Force together in controlled, sustainable patterns that would strengthen rather than weaken the barriers against the Void Dwellers. Yet implementing this solution would require more than our 2 consciousnesses could achieve alone. The Keys would need guardians, beings capable of understanding and maintaining the delicate balance required for this gradual healing. And these guardians would face opposition, not just from the Void Dwellers, but from Force traditions invested in maintaining the divide between light and dark, from beings whose power or purpose depended on the fragmented state. The seekers of balance, I realized, recalling those who had sacrificed themselves to allow our final approach. Some must have survived the confrontation, and there are others throughout the galaxy who have glimpsed aspects of the truth, who would recognize the potential in what we propose. Valen's consciousness expanded in what might be described as agreement. A new order, neither Jedi nor Sith, but something that transcends both, dedicated not to light or dark, but to the harmony that encompasses all aspects of the Force. Guardians of the gray current, ensuring that healing progresses neither too quickly nor too slowly, protecting the keys and the nexus points they establish. As this resolution crystallized between us, the United Keys responded, their structure beginning to separate once more into 7 distinct components, each retaining connection to the whole while embodying a specific aspect of the knowledge required for this great work. And as they separated, they created a barrier of pure Force energy that pushed back against the circling void dwellers, forcing the parasitic entities to retreat from the heart of the singularity. They sense what we intend, Valen warned as the shadows withdrew temporarily, their hunger transmuting into something resembling fear. They will marshal every resource to prevent implementation, to protect their food source. The moment we leave the Nexus, they will attack with all the power they can manifest in our dimension. I realized then the full magnitude of what we faced. Even with the knowledge of how reunification might be achieved, even with a path that avoided the worst outcomes of both continued fragmentation and sudden restoration, we still had to survive long enough to begin the process, to place the keys at their designated nexus points and establish the foundations of a new order to guard them. "We will not face them alone," came a voice that seemed to emanate from the Force itself. A resonance that carried echoes of the Wills, the Force priestesses, and others who existed beyond conventional form. What you have discovered affects the very foundation of existence. Those who perceive the patterns of the Force have sensed the potential for healing and will aid your effort. Through our expanded consciousness, I detected presences gathering beyond the singularity, Force sensitives from across the galaxy, drawn by visions or intuitions to points where they might intercept the void dwellers. Some were survivors of the seekers of balance. Others were individuals who had independently discovered aspects of the gray current, and many were beings who simply sensed a disturbance in the Force that demanded response. The third loop closes, Valen observed, their consciousness beginning to reintegrate with a more defined form as we prepared to leave the heart of the Nexus. The primordial threat is identified, the means of addressing it discovered, and the path toward healing revealed. What begins here will echo throughout history, though few will recognize its true significance until the process nears completion. The 7 keys, now reconfigured for their new purpose, arranged themselves in a pattern that mimicked the structure of the galaxy itself, each corresponding to a specific nexus point where the Force flowed with particular intensity. These would be our destinations once we left the singularity, the places where the foundations of healing would be established. As our consciousness began the transition back toward more conventional form, preparing to leave the heart of the Nexus and face whatever awaited beyond the singularity, I experienced one final vision. I saw the galaxy as it might become, not in years or decades but centuries hence, as the gray current gradually flowed outward from the 7 nexus points, healing the fragmentation of the Force in widening circles of influence. Force traditions that had existed in opposition for millennia would find common ground, not through compromise, but through transcendence, recognizing that their seemingly contradictory philosophies were complementary aspects of a greater truth. Beings born with Force sensitivity would develop connections to a wider spectrum of abilities, no longer limited to light or dark, but capable of drawing upon the full range of what the Force offered. Reality itself would become more fluid, not in the catastrophic way that might have resulted from sudden reunification, but in a gradual expansion of possibility. Physical laws would remain reliable enough for civilization to function while becoming more responsive to consciousness, allowing feats that would seem miraculous by current standards, but would represent merely the natural potential of a universe where the force flowed in greater harmony. And the void dwellers, finding their food source diminishing as the disharmony they fed upon was progressively healed, would retreat further from our dimension, their influence waning until they could no longer affect events within our reality. The passages between dimensions weakened by the original fragmentation would seal as the gray current restored the natural barriers that had once protected our universe from such parasitic entities. The vision faded as we completed our transition, our consciousness returning to forms that could interact with conventional reality. The singularity still surrounded us, but we had moved from its heart to its periphery, preparing to emerge back into normal space where our vessel awaited. The 7 keys floated between us, each pulsing with purpose, ready to begin the great work that would span generations. "Whatever happens now," Valen said, their form stabilizing into something recognizably humanoid. Though still shifting between aspects, the knowledge cannot be lost again. Even if we fall to the void dwellers or their agents, what has been discovered here will find its way to those capable of understanding and implementing it. The force itself will ensure this, its consciousness guiding events toward the healing it has sought for millennia. I nodded, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the lightness of shared purpose. "Then let us begin, knowing that we serve not light or dark, but the balance that encompasses both, the harmony that represents the force's true nature." As we prepared to leave the singularity to face whatever forces gathered to oppose us, I felt a profound sense of connection not just to Valen or the 7 keys, but to all beings throughout the galaxy who had ever sensed that there must be more to the Force than the limited perspectives offered by established traditions. We were the inheritors of a legacy stretching back to the dawn of time, carrying forward a truth that had been fragmented but never fully lost. And somewhere in the infinite possibilities that stretched before us, I glimpsed a future where balance was not merely a temporary state achieved through opposition, but the natural condition of existence, where the gray current flowed through all things, uniting rather than dividing, healing rather than wounding, a harmony of infinite variations that together created the grand symphony of the Force. The 7 keys have been dispersed across the galaxy, each placed at a nexus point where the Force flows with particular intensity. From these points, the gray current begins its gradual return, healing the ancient fragmentation not through sudden transformation, but through gentle, persistent influence that allows all connected to the Force to adapt harmoniously. I stand upon the surface of a nameless world at the edge of known space, watching as stars gleam in patterns that seem more meaningful than before. The Force flows through me differently now, neither purely light nor dark, but a spectrum of experience and potential that transcends such limited categorization. I sense not just nearby life, but connections stretching across vast distances, threads of possibility, linking all conscious beings in ways impossible to describe through conventional language. Valen has departed to guide others who have been drawn to this awakening, their forms shifting freely now between countless aspects, no longer bound by the limitations that once required them to maintain a consistent appearance. They are both teacher and student in this new era, sharing ancient wisdom while discovering fresh possibilities in the gradually healing Force. The void dwellers still exist at the margins of reality, but their influence wanes as the disharmony they feed upon diminishes. With each being who discovers balance within themselves, with each tradition that expands beyond rigid doctrine to embrace the full spectrum of the Force, the parasites find less sustenance in our dimension. Eventually, they will retreat entirely to their native realm, the passages between dimensions sealed by the restored gray current. Throughout the galaxy, dreams and visions guide Force sensitives toward a deeper understanding, toward nexus points where they might experience directly what cannot be adequately conveyed through words. Some who were Jedi or Sith find their perspectives challenging, their certainties questioned by experiences that contradict established doctrine. Yet many embrace this expansion, recognizing in it the fulfillment of prophecies and teachings long misunderstood. A new order gradually forms, not through proclamation or recruitment, but through natural resonance, beings drawn together by shared insight and purpose. The guardians of the gray current seek neither to replace existing traditions nor to establish dominance, but to preserve and nurture the healing process that has begun, to protect the nexus points and the keys they contain until their purpose is complete. The future stretches before us not as a fixed path, but as infinite possibilities, gradually converging toward harmony. The work begun here will not be completed in my lifetime, nor in many generations to come. The fragmentation created over millennia cannot be healed in years or decades, but requires patient, persistent effort, guided by understanding rather than dogma. Yet even in these early stages, changes manifest throughout the galaxy. Conflicts that once seemed inevitable find unexpected resolutions. Beings who would have been enemies discover common purpose. The rigid boundaries between light and dark, between creation and destruction, between order and chaos, become more permeable, allowing integration rather than opposition. Reality itself responds to this healing, becoming more fluid, more responsive to consciousness without losing the stability necessary for civilization to flourish. What was once considered miraculous becomes merely extraordinary, and what was deemed impossible becomes merely challenging, as the artificial limitations imposed by fragmentation gradually dissolve. I close my eyes, feeling the currents of the Force flow through and around me, sensing the grand pattern that extends beyond individual experience to encompass all existence. Where once I perceived only fragments, now I glimpse the whole, a harmony of infinite variations that together create the symphony of life itself. This is not an ending but a beginning, not a conclusion but a transition from what was to what might be. The gray current flows once more, gradually restoring what was sundered, healing what was wounded, reuniting what was divided. And in this flow, in this eternal dance of energies and awareness, lies the true nature of the Force, the balance that encompasses all things in perfect, endless harmony. If this journey has brought you peace, if these ancient mysteries have helped you find rest, then remember that you too are part of this greater flow, connected to all existence through currents that transcend time and space. And perhaps, in dreams or quiet moments of reflection, you might glimpse the gray current flowing through your own experience, inviting you to discover the balance that has always existed within. Sleep well, seeker of ancient wisdom. And if you wish to continue exploring these mysteries, to follow the currents of knowledge to new destinations, then remember to subscribe to our channel, where more journeys await. Until next time, may the Force in all its aspects and harmony be with you always.